Today I'm going to be sharing with you my exact scripts that I have used to generate over $3 million in commissions in commercial real estate sales in just the last 12 months. And if you don't know who I am, my name is Henry Eisenstein and I've been a part of over $450 million worth of real estate transactions, and I'm only 28 years old. And again, we're diving into the exact scripts that I use to sell millions of dollars worth of commissions in commercial real estate. The most important thing I want to share with you today is your opening line. So many people who want to get into cold calling, or just call it prospecting, because no one likes to cold call, but so many people miss out on the key fact that when you're cold calling, your opening line is the most important. So by the way, if you have not yet downloaded my new script book, which includes dozens of options for you no matter what type of real estate you're in, commercial and residential, make sure you click in the description down below. I believe it's the third link. You'll be able to download my script so you know exactly what I say when I'm talking to prospects today. Now, that all being said, the very first line that I use when I'm cold calling is the most crucial. We were just talking about this actually during the coaching program to a bunch of my students, and we're talking about how I decide exactly what script to use within the very first moments of the phone call. What's incredibly important to realize is that their energy, their response dictates exactly the direction in which I go. Now let me explain. When somebody answers the phone and they're super angry and they're super, short with me on the phone, I'm probably not gonna say, hey, this is Henry with EXP Realty. I'm a local real estate broker in the area, and I was just curious if you might consider selling your property. Just a normal, typical broker in the area, just calling around, basically circle prospecting. Again, works in residential and commercial. I probably won't go that route because they're in a different type of mood that script probably won't get the highest results. What I will do typically when they're short with me is I'll flip into a shorter script where I'm the principal buyer, okay? Where I will say, hey John, I know it sounds like you're in the middle of something. I'm actually a local investor in town and I'm looking to move some money from one investment to another, and I'm looking to keep my money in town, so I'm just curious if you might consider selling your property. Or I would just say at the very end, I was just curious if you'd be totally against hearing an offer on your property. So when I say it that way, when they see me as now the principal buyer, instead of a random commercial broker or broker in the area, they typically will view me differently and they'll give me a little bit more time of day, even though they seem pretty short on the phone. In the instance where they're a little bit maybe more excited, you can hear them smiling, you feel the lighter energy, in that instance, I will typically go the route of, hey, it's Henry with EXP Realty. I'm a local commercial broker in the area, and I represent a client who's going through a 1031 exchange and needs to move some money around and would like to have another investment in the area. So I'm just curious if you might consider selling your property. Very simple, very light, high energy, always smiling. But I'm very, very conscious of how their energy is, so I can kind of go in a different direction depending on what's needed. I don't like to just say I use one script 100% of the time because that's just not accurate. And depending on how their energy is when in response to a cold call, because again, listen, if you're cold calling somebody randomly out of the blue, you can't speak the same way to everyone, right? Everybody's energy is different. That means you need to kind of be nimble and adjust your energy and your scripting as well. So just to quickly recap, the multitude of opening lines are as follows. Number one, you're an actual investor in the area. You're the principal buyer calling as an investor to see if they consider selling the property. Number two, you're calling as just a random circle prospecting lead. Hey, I'm a local broker in the area and I'm just curious if you might consider selling your property. Not mentioning anything about a buyer. Then you can also go into the idea of, hey, I have a buyer and they're looking for another property because they have a 1031 exchange, and say something along the lines of, hi, my name is Henry with EXP Realty. I'm a local commercial broker in the area, and the reason for my phone call is I have a client who's going through a 1031 exchange and they're looking to buy another property in town, and I'm just curious if you might consider selling your property. And number four, you can go into the script as, hey John, this is Henry with EXP Realty. I'm a local commercial broker in the area. I'm actually representing a seller locally to your property at 123 Main Street, and I was just curious if you might consider buying another property in town. So those are typically my four opening lines, and depending how their energy is, and maybe a little bit more specifics, because sometimes I actually do, a lot of the time I do have a local property in the area, because especially if I'm like circle prospecting around an area where I know I have a buyer or I know I actually have an investment property, that is what will dictate the direction that I'm gonna go in to see if I can get the best response from that individual. One thing to take note on this next piece, which is different asset classes take different questions. It's very important to realize that regardless of what asset class you're calling, the opening line is remotely the same. However, the next couple questions are going to be dictated by the type of asset class. One key thing to know is that motivation trumps everything. Because at the end of the day, if they're not motivated and you hear things like, listen, make me an offer. I'm not really looking to sell, but for the right price, I'd consider it. I mean, how many times have you guys heard this? I hear it all the time and my students hear it all the time. So what I want you to know, and I said this recently on one of my coaching sessions, because one of the students was like, I have this deal, and they say that they just want an offer. I think it could be pretty decent. I'm not sure. And they kept going back and forth. And they kept following up with this one lead for a couple weeks. And I was like, listen, is it a good deal? Let's just call a spade a spade. If the property isn't a good deal, and as in you've pitched this out a couple times to a couple key investors, local in the area or not, just people who you know will most likely buy it, and none of them want it, it's one of two things. Either it's priced too high, which typically will be related to them not being motivated. Okay, they're not that motivated, or they'll consider selling it at a lesser price. Or the second factor is you just haven't put it in front of the right buyer. But I want you to call a spade a spade. If a deal just doesn't make sense and the numbers don't make sense, the income isn't right, the upside isn't good, there's a reason why the properties don't sell. Typically, it has to do with the ratio in which it produces income and the value it exchanges for the price. If it's not a great deal and they want too much money for it, it's like taking a square peg and shoving it into a round hole. It doesn't make any sense, right? At the end of the day, what I would like you to just focus on is people who would like to sell for a reasonable price. They don't have to sell it for a steal. That's not what this is. I mean, obviously, we hope and pray that they want it for a price that an investor gets super excited about, but that's not the common. What's incredibly common to have happen is someone says, yeah, sure, make me an offer, or sure, if I got the right price, I'd consider it, right? Something along those lines. And then you have a few people who go, yeah, listen, we have been thinking about selling. I'm looking for this price, and it happens to be a halfway decent price. That is the most common. And what ends up happening is, depending on their feedback, their response, right? After you've asked that opening line, which is again dictating that motivation so that you can go into deeper questions, again, asset specific, which we'll talk about in a brief moment here. I just want to be super clear. If they want a crazy high number and they're totally against listing the property for sale, it's okay for you just to follow up with them every 90 days until their price changes or the market catches up to where they're at. That's both okay. And there's a number of leads every year where I just know for a fact this isn't the time for us to get that price, and I'll just continually follow up with that individual until they're ready, or until my investors can make sense of paying that price because interest rates drop, or hypothetically when I follow up with them at some point, their price actually drops. Let's just keep that all in mind. Motivation is king, and if they're not that motivated, 9 times out of 10, you should just say, so what, next, I'll follow up with that person in 90 days, and I'm gonna keep prospecting until I find somebody who is motivated to sell, because there are plenty of them out there. Now, let's just say they say to you a halfway decent price. Okay? Which is incredibly important to realize that a halfway decent price is characterized as, in that area, they're willing to sell it at a reasonable fair market value in which an investor can make sense of investing in this property. AKA when you're running numbers based on a cap rate or a price per square foot, obviously depending on the asset class in which you'd run your numbers. But long story short, if you do not know how to analyze a deal on your own, it's incredibly important to practice so that you can analyze the deal. Now, you don't have to do it while you're on the phone with them. It is important to realize that if you cannot analyze a deal and figure out exactly what that property is intrinsically worth, it is going to be very difficult for you to succeed in the commercial world. Because all you're gonna basically be doing is gathering information, passing along information, and then hoping and praying that investor does something. But if you can master the art of underwriting a deal, this way, when you bring it to an investor, you already know it's a great deal, you are going to sell so much more real estate because you're not hoping and praying it makes sense to them. You already know it makes sense, and now it's just a matter of getting them to put an offer in writing so you can get this deal closed. Now let's quickly differentiate the different asset classes so you can ask specific questions. With retail properties and office, as well as industrial, the key things to keep in mind are they typically all sell at a price per square foot, as well as they're all gonna sell at a cap rate, of course. However, when you're asking questions, it's very important to understand the occupancy rates. How many tenants are there? Is it a single tenant or a multi-tenant property? Getting very clear about the price per square foot in which they want. Because I know very quickly, as an example, in my area, let's just take a quick number of $200 per square foot is a very conservative number for retail in my area. Let's just say I'm on the phone with somebody and someone says to me, I want $2 million for my 20,000 square foot shopping center. That's $100 a foot. Light bulbs go off in my head. I'm like, hey, this could be a really good opportunity. I need to make sure I get this deal done. But on a counter example, if I'm calling somebody up and they have a 5,000 square foot shopping center and they want $2 million, that's $400 a square foot. Probably gonna be a little bit overpriced, and more likely than not gonna be a good deal because they're probably not that motivated. But again, you need to know those quick numbers. because it's not just about a cap rate. Well, just because a 5,000 square foot property brings in $200,000 a year and the opening price at $2 million is a 6 cap, it doesn't mean that everyone's just gonna buy it. There might not be any upside in that property, so it might not make sense for somebody. On the other side, when it comes to different asset classes, let's just say it's a multifamily property. With multifamily, it's incredibly important to understand simple things like how much money is the property bringing in today, okay? And is the rents undervalued? Is there a lot more 2 bedrooms than there are 1 bedrooms, a lot more 1 bedrooms than there are studios? Because studios are the least desirable type of multifamily right now. All right, you typically want a decent blend of 1s and 2 bedrooms. Obviously, if you have a good amount of 3 bedrooms, that could also increase the pro forma value of the property because those rents are going to be higher. We just talked to a seller who has, I think, like 26 units of the property, but they're all studios. That 26 unit building has less intrinsic value or a pro forma value, a future value of that property is lower than obviously if it was all 1 bedrooms or all 2 bedrooms or a decent mix. That being said, like when someone says that, well, if that area warrants hypothetically $200,000 a unit retail, and the guy goes, well, I only want $150,000 a unit, the light bulbs might go off in your head, but then you say, just to be clear, what's the type of unit mix? Bedroom, bathroom counts. Well, they're all studios. And you're like, okay, well, it's actually not that great of a deal anyways, because studio units can only rent for, as an example, $1,200. And if they want $150,000 per unit, I'm not saying that doesn't make sense automatically, but you just have to know sometimes that, like, okay, well, those numbers just don't make sense. Because if 1 bedrooms are trading for $200, maybe studios go for $150, but maybe it makes sense to sell, maybe they only sell for $120. And you need to know that differentiation. So when I'm speaking to a seller and they say, yeah, no, actually I have a 10 family and they're all 2 bedroom units as an example, I'm gonna be like, oh, okay. Especially if they only want the prices of what average 1 bedrooms are selling for in the area, that's all of a sudden gonna be a light bulb in my head of like, okay, this could be really, really interesting. I need to know more about this property. So now, and last thing for land, the one thing I wanna stress to you is for all those people who say like, oh, well, this land is worth so much money because you can build X, Y, and Z. Nothing is set in stone, period, unless they are shovel ready with approvals and permits. When it comes to land, I recommend that you wanna make sure 1 of 2 things are happening. If they're trying to sell you on the fact like, well, you can build all of this crazy stuff here, well, you're gonna simply ask them, just curious, is it shovel ready and do you have all the permits? Am I ready to go the second I buy it? No. Typically you're gonna be like, well, I had the approvals 10 years ago. I could build 200 units back then. Things change. You might not be able to do what you did before. It's important to ask those questions. And again, by the way, land that is, that hypothetically is in a certain zone that has the approvals possibly down the road where you can build X, Y, or Z, it still has good value. It just means that it's probably not gonna be the same value as something that is shovel ready with a project ready to go. Just very, very different. And then obviously if you're trying to call on anything in the hospitality aspect of things, when it comes to hospitality, it's important to realize that I treat those pretty similar in the sense of like laundromats, car washes, hotels, motels. And the reason what I'm saying here is it's like a business, right? It's not normal pieces of real estate. It's actually running a company. You're running a business in that piece of real estate. It's not just important about like, what are the rents and what's the square footage? No, you're gonna wanna know specifically how much money did the property bring in? Can you show me tax returns for the last 3 years so we can have some type of proof of income so I can get you the most accurate number and valuation on this property for my investors. It's a very different conversation and you need to know these specifics. So I am gonna be actually launching a commercial course as well coming up, which is actually gonna go into incredible detail with every single asset class, how to talk to them on the phone, what questions to ask, how to run numbers, everything you're gonna need to know in order to take the commercial real estate industry by storm. Make sure you check that out. That'll be launching in hopefully in the next 30 to 60 days. Make sure you check that out. So the last few things I wanna talk about is 3 really important factors. Number 1, critical information you need in order to get an offer on a property. You need to have as much financials as possible so that your investor can make the most educated decision on what to offer on the property. If you don't have financials, it's very hard to make an offer just based off of a price per square foot as an example. So make sure when you're speaking to somebody, even if they're trying to give you a lot of pushback, to say, listen, I don't care what I have to sign or give you a proof of funds or anything. In order to get you the best price possible on this property, I'm gonna need some type of financials, because the last thing I'm gonna wanna do is give you some phony baloney number because they haven't even seen the financials yet. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, so here's my email. Please send me any type of financials. Or if I can, I'll even just say, listen, what's a rough gross estimated income on a monthly basis of this property? How much money does this property bring in on a monthly basis? Right, just a quick rough number. And then what I want to make sure I stress to you is when you're calling commercial properties, it's important to play the offers game. So typically when someone says, Henry, I want $3 million for my property and that's my number, be like, listen, I completely understand. Just to be really clear, can I get a little bit more details? We'll go through the details, blah, blah, blah. We'll get as much information as possible to give me a little bit of the financials. And then I'll be like, listen, based on the financials you've provided me, I mean, based on a 6 cap, you're gonna be a little bit closer to around 1.8 million. And what's important to say is like, listen, I'm a fanatic. I like making offers 100% of the time when I'm speaking with somebody because I wanna see exactly how motivated they are. So when I'm on the phone with somebody and they say I want 3 million, I'll try to offer them 1.8 on the phone. And the reason why I do that is because I wanna see what they say. Because some of them are gonna be like, I would absolutely never take 1.8 million, but listen, if we could try to get them to 2.5 or 2.6, I can get a deal done. Okay, fantastic. And if I can get you a contract where you net 2.5 or 2.6 million dollars, would you be totally against paying a realtor commission on that number? No. So just to be super clear, what you're actually interested at a $2.5 million purchase price, you really just want to make sure you net 2.4 million as an example, correct? Yes, that's about accurate. Okay, great. Now so if I brought you a contract where you net $2.4 million, can we get a contract done today? Yes, that sounds about right to me. Okay, great. But now I just got him down $600,000 and we've only been on the phone for maybe 5 or 6 or 7 minutes. So now I know that when I go to my investor, I can go to pitch the deal at 2.6, 2.7, 2.8 million, and there's some wiggle room to play with. Because again, my income is dictated on how good of a deal I make. Because if I make an investor more money, they're not gonna care how much money I make. It's important to pay attention to the fact that like the better the deal I can negotiate, the more deal is possible for me to make on a deal. Because on average, like I don't want to make 1 or 2% on a deal. I want to try to make 6%. And an investor is never going to pay me 6%, and I would not say for an investor to pay me 6% unless this deal is an unbelievable deal and it's got to make sense of the number they make, that they can make sense of. So it's just very important to realize that I like to start the negotiations immediately before I even present it to an investor. And then the last thing I always like to say is you're on the phone for a reason. You don't just call them to call them. You're on the phone to close, baby, close. So in order to close in commercial, this is a simple thing, just like residential, where you're gonna be like, listen, our next steps here are for us to simply set an appointment so I can tour the property, take a few photos for my client, and possibly even have them come with me. So what works better for you, an afternoon or evening appointment? And that's it. You wanna make sure you're scheduling appointments. Scheduling appointments has a direct correlation to how much money you're making. So it's incredibly important to realize you're not gonna just call to call, get some information, and then play the game down the road. No. You want to try to set as many appointments as possible, and the last thing I want to stress to you when it comes to setting appointments is stop setting them in the morning. Schedule the appointments for between 2 and 6 o'clock or from 6 o'clock on. I don't really care, but do not screw up your morning because all morning you should just be prospecting for new business, just like we're talking about right now, using my script book, which again is in the description down below. So listen everyone, I know this is like drinking from a fire hose, especially when I'm talking. So if you got value out of this video, it would mean the absolute world to me if you click the like button and subscribe if you have not done so already. Other than that, guys, I'll see you in the next video. Take care. If you're still watching this video, that means to me that you're a committed real estate agent and you're looking to take your life and business to the next level. I'm just curious. Why have you yet to schedule your free, no obligation coaching consultation? All you have to do is simply go in the description down below. And people are telling me this call has been the most unbelievable, the most powerful call they've had in their entire career. And here's just a few of the individuals who have taken full advantage of this call. And my mission is to support as many realtors as possible, build a 6- and 7-figure net income business so that they don't have to rely on this industry anymore for their everyday income. If you're a committed realtor, which I can seem like you are, all you have to simply do to take full advantage of this free coaching consultation is to go in the description down below and schedule your free call.